I chose to build Rapture. But my city was betrayed by the weak.
It's all over now. No! I won't hurt ya!
BioShock. This game took gaming communities by storm with its dark, claustrophobic story, its atmospheric undersea city of Rapture, and its many insane and zany characters.
Charlie, where you going? No, Charlie! This isn't
The story of this game is a very memorable one, with a huge twist that people still talk about to this day. Playing as a man named Jack, you come out of a plane crash, then find yourself in Rapture, trying to figure out what's going on and working with characters to further their goals while helping you out. Going through the city, coming across these weird powers called plasmids that require a substance called Atom, seeing people that have gone mad with plasmid addiction, hulking and silent enemies called Big Daddies that follow the creepy little sisters around while they collect Atom, and characters with their own motivations either helping you or trying to stop you. Follow that up with a sequel, BioShock 2, you get to play as a badass Big Daddy called Subject Delta. Waking up from a coma in the familiar city of Rapture, you're on a quest to reunite with your little sister that you were bonded with on creation, all while working with or against characters with their own goals. And lastly, BioShock Infinite. Infinite took place in a completely different location this time around, so it had to build itself up from the start, as it was a new story and didn't have any pre-existing mythos surrounding it. Taking place high above the clouds in the floating city of Columbia, you play as Booker DeWitt, on a job to save a girl from the city and get her out of there. The various enemy types are different, but they have a somewhat familiar feel to them that still has that BioShock DNA. Crazy characters, and yet another story that took the world by storm. Basically, it's completely normal for a BioShock game to have a hugely talked about story. These three games made up a portion of my time at college. I first played BioShock 2 in 2010, and thankfully, after the game had me enthralled, I was able to follow it up immediately with BioShock 2 that same year. I immensely enjoyed my time with these games, then had to wait until BioShock Infinite dropped in 2013, got that on release, and found it lived up to my hype for the series. The BioShock name means a lot to me now, and hearing that there's a fourth one on the works gets me excited for the future of the franchise. Now, out of all three of those games, the one that is seen in a more negative light, and quite literally the middle child, would be BioShock 2. The point of this video, when BioShock 2 released, unlike 1 and Infinite, it didn't release with a new location, new enemies, or new setting. It was tied to BioShock 1 in Rapture. BioShock 1 released in 2007, and now shows signs of its aging gameplay, but a widely talked about story. BioShock 2 released 3 years later in 2010, and came with some good quality of life adjustments. Follow that up with Infinite giving us a new location and even better gameplay, and you can start to see why 2 got sandwiched between two titans of game development. BioShock 2 is seen more negatively because it doesn't break new ground. It doesn't have this grandiose twist in it like that of 1 and Infinite. It doesn't change the formula in any significant way. Honestly, 2's reception had people saying it felt more like a glorified expansion that didn't need a full game release. I beg to differ. I personally think that BioShock 2 lives up to what his predecessor did. It might not have that big twist everyone was hoping for, but it does take the gameplay that we enjoyed with 1 and brought it up to the next level while still having an enjoyable story. I think BioShock 2 deserves its seat up there with its counterparts. I want to talk about what I think the game did well and what I really enjoyed from it. I'm here to speak in defense of BioShock 2. Alright, first things first, let's talk about the gameplay. Now, BioShock 2, still being set in the same location as the first game, has a lot of similar things in the gameplay area that 1 had. Even with that, I'm going to be talking about the strengths of BioShock 2. Even if the gameplay stuff overlaps with 1, I'll be talking about 2 like it's its own thing. So with that out of the way, let's hop right into it. The gameplay of BioShock 2 is a step up from the previous game. In 1, you had guns and melee weapons in your right hand, and plasmids, the more magical aspect of the game, in your left. However, one caveat was that in BioShock 1, you could only use one or the other. You had to switch between both, kind of like only having your right hand up and then switching to only your left hand up. It's not a very realistic way to fight, but back in 2007, it worked fine in the game. BioShock 2 stepped up the game by allowing you to use both at the same time. If you got a plasmid that allowed you to use your left hand as a flamethrower, you could also shoot the enemy with your gun in your right hand at the same time. It absolutely made the game better in terms of having a more fluid combat system. I've been in a few situations where I had to fight multiple enemies at the same time, and I had my machine gun in my right hand firing a constant barrage of bullets at the same time as using the fire plasmid to attack enemies and set them on fire. Not having to decide which to use at a moment's notice is much better feel for the game and makes you feel stronger overall. And you should feel stronger than the average enemy. After all, you play as a big daddy now. So coming off of that new iteration in the combat, let's talk about the Rapture staples of weapons and plasmids. So for the plasmids, you have quite a few of them, and you can switch to any of them whenever you want, as long as you have the slots to hold them. You have ones such as Electro Bolt, where you can zap an enemy to stun them, or, if they're in a body of water, you can electrocute them, dealing an immense amount of damage. You can have Incinerate, where you cast fire itself at your enemies, and watch them set their allies on fire by accident if they're close enough. And even unique ones like the grotesque Insect Swarm, where you can let loose a swarm of bees to seek out nearby enemies and have them freak out and take a little bit of damage over time to break up the pace of battle and catch your bearings. It goes even further with you being able to upgrade your plasmid powers to do even more things. Incinerate starts out with you only being able to light your enemies on fire from afar. The second stage allows you to charge it up and have an area of effect light from afar, so rather than enemies having to touch the one on fire to also get caught, now they just have to be in a reasonable range to be set ablaze. And finally, Stage 3 allows you to normally proc the AoE effect of 2 without having to charge up, but now the charge up aspect turns into a flamethrower from your hand. That's just one example of what the plasmid upgrade system can do. And you get these upgrades from a vending machine called the Gatherer's Garden, where you can use Atom that you've collected as a currency to purchase the upgrades or even new plasmids. The Gatherer's Garden also sells something called Gene Tonics that are passive abilities that you set to also be stronger, take less damage, or even explode in a certain element when you're hit with a melee weapon. The plasmids and gene tonics are a very unique touch in the universe of Bioshock and are very welcomed for what they bring to the table. Now, let's talk about the weapons. When you start the game, you immediately have the Big Daddy staple of the drill arm. But you can use firearms as well as you find them in the game, such as the single-shot rivet gun, the constant fire machine gun, a double-barrel shotgun, etc. Your arsenal may not be as big as, say, a looter shooter, but the different utility of all the weapons can help out in pretty much any type of combat situation you find yourself in. That's not to mention the different ammo types you can find for all the firearms. An example for your rivet gun would be that you start with normal rivets that you can fire at enemies. However, you do have access to 2 more types of ammunition, such as the heavy rivet, which is recommended you use to do more damage on enemies with more health. And finally, the trap rivet, a rivet that you can set as a sort of trip mine for targets to walk into and take damage. Using these, you can set up a defense point for yourself as enemies come to your location, and it'll whittle them down on the way over. Another example for your double-barrel shotgun is you normally have shotgun shells to fire off at enemies, but you also have access to the heavier hitting single-target slug rounds, and finally, incendiary rounds to set your targets ablaze. You also have the ability to upgrade your weapons and make them not only stronger, but also better in different situations, simply by going to the vending machine called Power to the People. This machine allows you to upgrade your various weapons 3 times each, so you can turn your double-barrel shotgun from a 2-shot then reload weapon into a 6-shot before reload by selecting the upgrade to add more rounds, and it visually updates the weapon when you see it next to. Now, I did say there were 3 upgrades, but in order to get the 3rd, you'll need the first 2 before you can get it. The 3rd upgrade tends to be a very unique and inventive kind of addition to your weaponry, such as the machine gun having its rounds ricochet off surfaces to hit enemies, or having your drill block projectiles simply by spinning. All in all, the combat is very intuitive and allows you to play in a large number of ways and feel strong. Since combat is extremely prevalent in the world of Bioshock, it should be good to compensate for the amount of time you're fighting, which, by the way, is absolutely the case with Bioshock 2. Stepping away from combat, you interact with the world in different ways, such as needing the incinerate plasmid to melt ice, which can be holding items that you need, or even certain pathways that you can walk into for more loot, or even get a jump on a group of enemies you see. The levels are made in a way that they're essentially a playground that you slowly work your way through before getting to the next level. When you get to the next level, you're blocked off from going backwards for a number of story reasons that don't repeat. Something that was criticized in the first game was a section where you impersonate a Big Daddy and follow a little sister around and try to protect her in a very escort mission type of system where she will get attacked at certain points and have her own health bar. If she dies or you die, you need to restart. Now, while you are a Big Daddy and you can protect little sisters, outside of probably the very beginning of the game, you're not particularly forced to keep them safe. But if you do, you get rewarded with more Adam, and this time, the system for protection is much better than in the first game. This updated system has you finding dead bodies, or angels, as the little sisters like to say, in certain areas predetermined in every level. Once you set down the little sister, she gets to work collecting the Adam, but this time, there's only a progress bar. She doesn't have a health bar this time, so you don't have to worry about her dying. The only thing is, enemies will try to take her, but all it does is stops her progress in this horde mode system. You have access to various ways to set up traps around the area and make it a fortress. Once her progress meter is filled, simply pick her up, head to the next body, and then bring her to the vent where you can then either rescue her from being a little sister, or the evil harvest, where she will die, but you will get more Adam from doing so. If you harvest the little sister, you're a monster, and I hope you know that. Rescuing and harvesting is one of this game's ways of having a karma system, about you being good or evil. It's your choice. Evil nets you more Adam for more upgrades to become stronger, and good gives you less Adam, but you have certain times where you're given a care package from the ones you save. You're rewarded from either path you choose, and it gives you choice while also changing up dialogue and even giving you a different ending based on what you do. When you get Adam from a little sister in either of these ways, you have a chance at getting attacked by a big sister. They're new to Bioshock 2 and are a strong enemy to face off against, as they're very agile, can use plasmid powers, and can even teleport. Their designs look awesome too, and you can feel the tension when one shows up. The other way of determining good or evil is whether you kill or let certain NPCs live. It's again your choice and will help to determine future dialogue and the ending you get. Bioshock might not be as choice-driven as other RPGs like Fallout, but this system does work for the story the developers wanted to tell and is yet another strength of the game with its narrative. While a good portion of the gameplay in Bioshock 2 comes from its predecessor and what made that game great, the changes that 2 brought to the table helped to make it stand out from the first game and be great on its own. Being set in the same place as the first, it makes sense that the devs would have more time to flesh out the gameplay and bring it to the next stage of this franchise. Now, let's talk about the world and setting. Bioshock 2 takes place in the 1960s. After waking up from a coma, Subject Delta, your character, is in the same location that was in the first game, a huge undersea city called Rapture. The city of Rapture is a big place and, well, underwater. It's set in the Atlantic Ocean, and being a city that is underwater, the amount of issues it has from that is astounding. From the glass that's leaking in ocean water to that of the rundown society of the people in Rapture itself, this city is completely falling apart and is not afraid to show it. Even while falling apart, Rapture is still a living and breathing place, albeit on life support. You never know when something in the story is going to cause something to break. It could be from a room getting absolutely flooded by an outside force, to that of an entire wing of the level being completely frozen over. A character can use explosives to stop you from going back to a previous location. Anything can happen. From the big, grandiose rooms, to all of the claustrophobic hallways, Rapture is pretty much its own character on the verge of collapse at a moment's notice. It's a city that won't be there forever. It has far too many problems. But even with all of that, it's still stunningly beautiful to look at. There are hallways where you are surrounded by glass to show you Rapture in all its undersea glory, and it's something I've had to stop at multiple times to appreciate it and soak it all in. You can see all of the ocean floor life that's there to show off. Not only is Rapture a character, but so is the ocean itself. This isn't like a city that says you're somewhere and never shows it off. The developers set the game underwater and show it off as much as they can, and it never gets stale. From placing debris to block doorways, to making small but easy puzzles to solve, you can really feel the same love the devs had from the first game brought over into the second. Being set underwater brings its own challenges to the world, and you have so many voice recordings that you can pick up, listen to, and hear about the various characters talk about each other, their goals, and the issues they bring with Rapture. Rapture was faithfully recreated from Bioshock 1 and placed into Bioshock 2. This being a big city, Subject Delta is in a completely different part of it than Jack was from 1. Essentially, telling a different story in a different location with different characters is quite easy to do in a place with this much personality in it. While playing, you do have an arrow at the top of your screen that you can follow for your objectives. While some people might have an issue with having something point you toward your objective at all times, I like how it works, as in a lot of exploration games, if you have a fork in the road, one will be the way to continue the story, and the other will have a dead end with loot in it. In those games, if I end up going down the correct path by accident, I then have to backtrack all the way back to the other pathway to get that loot. So the arrow constantly pointing me in the direction for the story helps for sure with me knowing which way is the loot-filled cave. It works so well for me as the loot goblin I am. And boy, do you get rewarded for exploration in this. Sure, you do get a lot of your absolutely needed stuff by just playing normally. But with the exploration, you can find many of the extra stuff that you need for combat, such as first aid and ammo. This game has a lot of times where I will be either out of ammo or have too much and can't pick it up. So whenever I find that I'm fully stocked on something, I can then cut loose a little bit with that weapon in the next fight because I know where I can go and restock. From the enemies to the looks of the areas you visit, everything feels like it belongs and it feels so incredibly immersive. This game's setting is dark, cold, claustrophobic, and beautiful, and the devs are not afraid to show it all off. Next up is the story, quests, and characters. The Bioshock games are known for a lot of things: the world, the characters and their motivations, and most of all, the story. The story of Bioshock 2 may not hit the same amount of surprising buzz as the other two titles in the franchise, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a compelling and gripping story. So the first thing in the game you see is a cutscene of you, Subject Delta, getting your little sister to start making your normal rounds of collecting Adam. Your little sister runs ahead and screams. Delta then runs over to find her being attacked by some people. As her protector, Delta jumps down and starts doing what Big Daddies do best: brutally murdering everyone there. Unfortunately, Delta gets hit with a plasmid that's made to pacify Big Daddies and make them obedient to what they're told to do. It's now that you find out that your little sister there is unique. She's not just some faceless little girl. She's the daughter of someone high up on the food chain. It's the mother, Sophia Lamb, who then tells Delta to shoot himself, which, because of the plasmid, he does. Then, Delta wakes up from a 10-year coma, gets up, and starts walking through the first level. Seeing the first big sister of the game, she jumps out of there, giving you an idea of just how fast and athletic they are. Once Delta gets close to a Gatherer's Garden vending machine, it's then that he's mentally contacted by his little sister, and she calls him Father. Here you find out that Delta is connected to your little sister in a bigger way than just a job. After getting his first plasmid, Delta then starts to turn on the city to progress, and finally, contacted by a character from Bioshock 1, Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum. Tenenbaum tells you what to do, giving you objectives until you meet her face to face, with glass between both of you for safety. She tells you to hold off the splicers that are coming and essentially hands you off to another person, one that'll be with you for most of the game, Augustus Sinclair. This time, in Bioshock 2, you have a goal to achieve unlike the first game, a character goal. And like I said before, that goal is to make it over to your little sister, the one that you were bonded with when you became a Big Daddy. Her name is Eleanor Lamb. Like at the very beginning of the game, she's able to telepathically communicate with you, and it's your bond that gives you both that connection. As you continue through the game, the story about what's been happening over time starts to unravel and make sense. Stuff that happened to these various sub-districts in Rapture, the characters behind them, and the fast descent in the madness. All the while, Sophia Lamb, the game's main antagonist, is trying to stop you at every turn from getting to her daughter. She blames Delta for everything that's happened to Eleanor, but as the cracks start to show, the closer you get, the more you see what her motivations are as a character and what she thinks of her own daughter. The story may not have a mind-blowing twist in it like 1 and Infinite do, but the story is still well grounded with philosophies flying around and people who would kill to uphold their goals. The story's greatest strength is how solid it is. There's nothing in it that took me out of the immersion of the world. Everything made sense in a spectacular way. For a game that took me a little over 11 hours to complete, the story that's in it is great. Questing in the various areas changes up as you find out just what the obstacles are. One of the quests that you need to do is getting rid of all the little sisters in the area, so this man, Stanley Poole, was given this sub-district and wants them all gone. He doesn't particularly allude to why, but you find out that little sisters can see the memories of the departed. Through this narrative choice, you slowly piece together what he did and why he wanted them gone. They were the proof needed to find out that Stanley betrayed Sophia. It ends with Sophia telling Delta and Stanley that she always knew and that she forgave him. She then adds that even though she forgave him, he now has opened a path for Delta to get closer to Eleanor and has sealed his fate. She gives you the chance to kill him, It's up to you to decide whether or not to kill him.
Just let me live!
Character interactions and quests like these, all while piecing the story together bit by bit as to what happened through their dialogue and the recordings in the levels, really help to sell the world. Rapture is here. It may be fallen and decrepit, but it's here in all its beauty. Later in the game, Delta's connection to Eleanor is used against them by her own mother suffocating her to put Delta back into a coma to capture him. Even though he awakes, he's trapped and can't get out. Now you find out that Eleanor was the guiding hand for all the little sisters in Rapture. She gives you control of a little sister, and this is the first time we truly get to see through the eyes of a little sister in-game. They don't see the horrors that we all see. It's a unique way of telling the story of the game by taking you from your badass body and placing you into one that can't fight. Thankfully, you don't need to fight, but your goal is now to help rescue Eleanor so she can, in turn, rescue Delta. This type of quest really goes to show just how far the character's fingers go in various different ways of power. Eleanor controlled the little sisters without her mother knowing. Sophia controlled the city through the guise of family, all to further her goals. Gilbert Alexander, a brilliantly insane character, uses his authority to dictate everyone in his area in a sort of Big Brother is always watching kind of way, and it's glorious. Especially his dialogue and how he tries to thwart Delta's progress.
Password to enter.
I warned you. The way of town is out and life's a pain. Weatherman says heavy rain. A little boost is all you need. Average Joe to Hercules. Stronger arm and sharper brain. That's why the future is haunted.
Each area has its own flavor of Rapture, with its own colorful cast of characters, with only a few going from beginning to the end of the game. I really enjoyed the story and do recommend experiencing it for yourselves. There was also an expansion for Bioshock 2 called Minerva's Den. It kept the same formula as normal Bioshock 2, but gave you a few new toys to play with, such as the ion laser weapon that you can use to laser beam people to death, light them on fire, or even charge up and fire a single high-damaging blast. And the gravity well plasmid that you can play around with, having fun making your enemies fly around a single point of gravity that you placed yourself. The story of Minerva's Den has you playing as Subject Sigma and does have a return to form twist in it that I think is foreshadowed pretty well and recommend to anyone that beats Bioshock 2. The DLC isn't the same length as 2's main story, so it's a more bite-sized story that you can beat in a single sitting of just a few hours. It also wraps up a story thread that was left open, with Tenenbaum leaving Delta as she appears in the story of Minerva's Den. Definitely recommend. Just because Bioshock 2 is sandwiched between 1 and Infinite, two games that help shape future industry games, doesn't mean that Bioshock 2 isn't a titan itself. I see 2 as being underappreciated for what it brought to the table. Infinite took some gameplay cues from 2 when it was made, such as the combat, and further evolved the formula of powers in left, weapon in right, and using both. Bioshock 2 still helped to bring the franchise up, and to further heights. To say it's not as memorable as 1 and Infinite is fine, but to say it doesn't matter is really a disservice to the game itself. Bioshock 2 may not be the big jump in quality people expected, like from Infinite, but that doesn't mean it's not great as well.